Okay, good evening, everyone. It is now 6:30, and I will call this meeting of the Planning Commission to order. The first item on the agenda is adoption of the agenda. Does staff have any changes?
No changes from staff.
Commissioners, any changes? Okay, see none, would someone like to make a motion?
I move to accept.
Commissioner Roberts, second?
Second.
By Commissioner Awad. Any other discussion? See none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. The second item on the agenda is to approve the minutes from the September 9th meeting. Does staff have any changes?
No changes from staff.
Commissioner, any changes? Okay.
I move to approve.
I'll second.
Roberts and John. Is there any other discussion? No? And I will abstain from voting. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. The third item of the agenda is a public hearing for a variance to the principal structure side yard setback for an addition to a single-family home located at 14633 Fieldcrest Lane and is presented by Ms. Arnold.
Thank you. Good evening, Planning Commissioners. So this application is related to an addition to a home by enclosing the area underneath the deck as attached living space. So the subject site is a 9,672 square foot lot with a single family home on it. So the neighborhood is a single family planned unit development where the developer platted the subdivision in various lot size. So it's a lot size deviation to average the lot size to equal that 10,000 square foot requirement. And this lot being one of the ones that's smaller than 10,000 square feet. So zoned R1 with that planned unit development and guided low density residential. So the variance request is for a variance to the side yard setback for the primary structure. The addition as built is a 9.1 foot setback from the north side property line. Per the included survey, a total of 2.5 square feet of area is within that setback line. So the existing deck met accessory structure setback requirements, which is 5 feet from the side property line. By enclosing the area, making it an addition, the area does become part of the primary structure, and it meets that next 10-foot requirement rather than 5. So as mentioned, the lot is slightly smaller and was approved that way and would be considered legally conforming. With that in mind, though, the proposed setback is reasonable. It does reflect similar development pattern in the neighborhood with the varying lot sizes. The variance request altogether and overall is minor variance from the ordinance. For some staff considerations, so other city departments did review the application, had no comments. When using the variance guideline policy, this application has 8 positives, 5 negatives, and 6 non-applicables. Staff would say that this was a reasonable request for the variance and not detrimental to the area, though it may be caused by action of the property owner. The request of 9.1 feet compared to 10 feet, overall 2.5 square feet that's over the setback line, minor and reasonable. The materials used for the addition are consistent to the existing structure. The setback variance is the only item under review for the application. Building department was able to review the building permit when it did come in and was able to say that it was sufficient and sign off on that. Police, fire, engineering, no comments. So staff is recommending approval of the application as presented. No conditions involved with the variance application.
Hey. Thank you, Ms. Arnold. Commissioners, do you have any questions for staff?
No.
Okay, so seeing none, I will open the public hearing at 6:34. Is there anybody from the audience who wishes to speak? Okay, if not, I will close the public hearing at 6:35. Commissioners, any other discussion? Commissioner John.
I move that staff, that we recommend the city council approve this application for
Eileen Keehan for a variance to the principal structure side yard setback for an addition to the single-family home located at 14633 Fieldcrest Lane as presented.
Second.
Okay, is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. And this will be heard at the October 8th City Council meeting?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So the fourth item on the agenda is a public hearing for the City of Burnsville for an amendment to City Code Title 10 zoning, Chapter 30 signs, related to definitions, temporary signs, allowable and prohibited signs, freestanding signs allowed by permit, and banner signs for condos presented by Ms. Arnold.
Thank you again. So this item is kind of a continuation of some of the sign ordinance changes that you may have seen over the last year and earlier this spring. This is kind of a big undertaking for the department to make these changes to the sign ordinance. It's probably our most amended ordinance or section of the ordinance, partly because technology is always changing and partly because there are a lot of laws related to content that may change what we need to say in our ordinance. So the bulk of these changes that were passed earlier this year were related to creating a ordinance that references as little content-based decision-making as possible. So that way the city is judging signs based on construction methods, size, location, but not really saying this type of sign gets different rules than this type of sign based on what they're saying. So most of that was from a Supreme Court decision that said that cities can't regulate content in that way. So the why of why we're changing it again. So we rolled out or began the rollout process of this ordinance earlier this year and over the summer, and realized that some of the questions that we were asking ourselves as we were interpreting the new signs, as we reviewed new permits, were maybe some clarifying definitions on what is a temporary sign, what is a permanent sign, how can we make this language requirements plainer, easier to interpret for staff, easier to enforce for staff, and easier for a sign applicant to firmly know what type of sign they should be applying for. So we've decided to make a few more changes to the definitions, remove a few things that were inadvertently left out the first time around, and then just some minor adjustments based on some suggestions from other staff members and things we would like to see in the ordinance based on how we enforce the ordinance every day with every application that we see. So proposed sections to be changed are related to, just like I said, definitions, general provisions, types of signs that are allowed, types of signs allowed by permit, different, and the banner signs for the condominiums, which is proposed to be completely removed. So again, the intent of these changes is to create an ordinance that we can easily explain to the applicants and that they can easily understand without really having to ask questions and get an additional interpretation. So in the definitions section, as you can see, we are reworking the definitions for the freestanding sign, a permanent sign, a temporary banner sign, a temporary freestanding sign, an overall temporary sign. Much of these changes are related to making sure that the language is more basic. We removed some language that says cannot be removed without special handling. That's not a firm definition. We wanted to tie everything back to timing. So on the temporary signs, it has to be installed for the duration subject to the standards in the permit section of the ordinance, or its intended use is indefinite for a permanent sign. So we're tying everything back to timing to make that firm and clear as to the intent of the standards of construction for the sign. We were also removing the vehicle sales sign, which was a content-based sign that was inadvertently left out from the last large-scale amendment to this ordinance. Under general provisions, this is related to the location of banners. So there's an existing exception for special events that as a special event, a sign can be located on fences, things like that. So we added, or as a temporary banner, as there are current banners in the city on fences that previously did not require a permit, And because of what content they said, but because we're no longer regulating content, these banners that are on fences can now get a permit to be placed there. So for allowable and prohibited signs in any zoning district, again, vehicle sales inadvertently left out, and we're removing it now. And then adjusted the numbering underneath it since we removed number 7. 1 permit per street frontage on a property, which is consistent with permanent signs, where you can have a permanent sign on up to 2 facades administratively. Temporary freestanding sign timing, we included this in temporary banner signs the first time around, that it was a maximum of 2 permits allowed per year. So we've added that in to make it consistent between the 2 sign types. For freestanding signs allowed by permit, we renamed it to permanent freestanding signs allowed by permit to differentiate the separate requirements for temporary signs versus permanent signs. And then one of the bigger changes that's not related to whether it's a freestanding sign or whether it's a temporary sign is the addition of a second freestanding sign associated with an approved drive aisle. We did subject it to some size standards. We had 3 requests this year for someone with a drive aisle with their business, think fast food, to have 2 menu boards per approved drive aisle, and our ordinance only allowed 1. So in looking at other cities and what we see when we're driving through different businesses like this, having a second board that was smaller was added to our ordinance as well. And then again, the banner signs for condominiums was inadvertently left out of the approved ordinance from earlier this year. Total removal of this content-based language in our sign ordinance. So that is a kind of a lengthy overview of the changes we're making to the sign ordinance we're proposing this evening. So staff is recommending approval of the ordinance changes as proposed. It's a public hearing, and I can stand for questions.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Commissioner Awad?
Oh, I was first?
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Arnold, for, there's a lot of parts to that, and thanks for kind of explaining it. How does this compare to what other cities do, like in our neighboring cities? Is that something, you kind of alluded to checking what other people do, but is our sign rules similar to the people around us?
So the comparison to our market cities came with the first round earlier this spring, and so I don't have too much of it in my background report here this evening. Burnsville strives with our ordinances to kind of be in the middle of the road, whether we're more strict or less strict. In the sign ordinance case, because a lot of cities are still working really hard to comply with this Supreme Court decision and haven't made the big overhaul of their sign ordinances yet, we're now at the point where we're probably less strict than some of our market cities, but it will start coming around that some other cities will be making these changes to have very broad restrictions rather than very specific. You know, if your sign says this, it can only be here on every other Tuesday or something.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Timmerman?
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Arnold, thank you so much. When we looked at this last year, it was nice to talk about removing a lot of the content-based restrictions. I think that's really gonna help the people, our businesses, and even our individuals who use signs throughout the year. So I think that's great to try to comply with that Supreme Court decision. My question is more based around enforcement going forward. I know that we've, by and large, been a complaint-based have had a complaint-based type of enforcement strategy. Is that going to be true going forward? And will there be active review by licensing and permitting to make sure that the signs meet the ordinance?
So staff, after this proposed ordinance kind of gets into the next phase, we are working on kind of a marketing technique that we'll do going forward, because these new changes and the strict enforcement of this is going to, in some cases, it's cheaper for different types of temporary signs, and in other cases, people are required to get a permit now when their content of their sign used to exempt them from needing a permit. So there is going to be a marketing strategy going forward to work with property owners in shopping centers and things like that of the new requirements going forward and how to apply and what type of sign or that they may currently have that in the future they would need to get a permit for, just so that they know. So we're going to try to approach it more of a marketing end on the front and using our contacts in the sign industry, as well as in the just general developer and property owner industry in the city as well, before we move into a more strict enforcement stage as we would enforce any other aspect of the ordinance.
Thank you.
Any other questions, commissioners? Okay, I will open the public hearing at 6:45. It doesn't look like there's anybody here who wishes to speak, so I will close it at 6:46. Just round up. Are there any other questions or comments? Commissioner Timmerman.
I'd like to make a motion that the planning commission further recommends to the city council the changes that staff has presented tonight.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion carries, and this will be heard at the October 8th City Council meeting. Okay, so the last item on the agenda are updates. Staff, do you have any updates?
Just for the commissioners, you should have all received some information last week about an upcoming special work session with the Economic Development Commission and Planning Commission. So that has been scheduled for October 2nd. It will be here in the council chambers, starting at 6:30. And the reason for that is we have two studies that are being undertaken, consultants helping the city with various things. One of them is the TOD ordinance, Transportation Oriented Development, and that is a big part of our comprehensive plan work that we had done, so it's a way to implement the comprehensive plan. Regina has been working with consultants on that, so that would be a presentation of that, kind of an overview, and then to get feedback from all of the commissioners on, are we moving in the right direction? Are there things that we are missing? Are there others that should be involved? Those types of things. And then likewise, same thing is happening with our parking ordinance. I'm coordinating that with a consultant, and they will also be here making a presentation, and it's really taking a look for parking at a couple of things. Over the last couple of years, we've had some issues come up with some types of uses. Usually they're when you've got existing industrial buildings and other businesses or assembly, churches, those types of things, want to go into these buildings that were constructed and designed in code related to storing stuff instead of having people there. So there have been some issues that way. And then also to take a look at how what are the tools that are available for doing more, not so much like structured parking, but parking agreements, having mixed use is going to have different implications for parking. So how can we update our ordinance, have it be more modern and more applicable, for what we anticipate that's going to be happening in the future. So those types of things. And then also, the parking numbers, I think the last time we looked at the standards, those performance standards, was 2005. And there were a couple of updates, but not many. So a lot of our standards are, we think from a staff perspective, probably overly restrictive. We think that things have changed. We have a much more transit now than we had in 2005, and it's just moving in that direction. So should there be adjustments made? So those are the two primary things that we'll be going through. And then there will also be, I think, a follow-up, also including the actual transportation study that's being done for the County Road 42 area. And that will occur in early November. And when we have a date set, you'll be getting invitations to that as well.
Great.
I think, Sarah, if you have others?
Yes, so for the three items that were on public hearing at your last meeting, the microbrewery and the Colonial Villas apartment application were approved on consent, and the strip center that had the landscaping deviations, and the building materials was approved via your changed recommendation on the regular agenda that night. And then this is the draft agenda for your October 14th Planning Commission meeting. So not 2 weeks from now, but 3 weeks.
Great, thank you. Okay, there is nothing left on the agenda. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Roberts,
Second.
by Timmerman. Is there any other discussion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Great, thanks, everybody.